I told Boros to not harm any more innocent people, and if he agreed I would give him the fight he's been seeking, and he said I agree. And then I said, Dad, don't do anything, let me handle this please. And he said, sure kiddo, but if you can't beat him I will still be here. And I said, good to know and thanks. And Saitama said, give him hell son. And then I stepped forward and Boros decided to punch me first, and I stood there unmoved and I looked at him with a bored expression and I said, good strike, that tickled a little bit. And then Boros looked scared and I flicked his armor and it cracked, and he gave me the same speech he would have given Saitama in the canon story. He said, this armor contains my infinite and truly irresistible powers. And I scoffed and said, your powers are not infinite but mine are. And then I flicked him in the forehead and he got knocked back really far away, and then he rushed back to punch me, and then I dodged him and I slapped him, and then I grabbed his face with my big hand and I said, come here, and I slammed in the ground where he's now embedded in the floor. And then that's when I barely punched him several times in the face and I held back all my powers as Boros started bleeding everywhere. And then I picked him up and I threw him through the top of the ship and I flew up and I was now hovering above him with my arms crossed, and I said, give up Boros, you fool, you can't win. And Boros started to transform again and he said, I'm not done yet. And I said, you're no match for me, I'm not even using my full power. And he said, give me your full power. And I said, if I do that Boros, if I lifted all my suppressions and I transformed into my final form, I might accidentally kill you with my powers. And said, just do it, I need to see it. And I asked why, because if you transform into your final form and you beat me I will join your hero team. And I said, interesting proposal, I accept. And then I said, are you sure you want to see this? And then I began to transform into my giant monstrous lion form, and then I roared and Boros said, my god, you're a man lion and a giant. And I said, this is my true form. And then Boros said, I have no choice, I have to use it. And then I said, then use it, but it won't matter, you can't win against me Boros. And then Boros achieved god key form and I smirked and I said, this is going to be a bit interesting. And then I compacted all my immense powers inside myself and I held back so I would not kill Boros when I punched him just enough power to make him bleed and even injure Boros. And then I began to beat Boros within an inch of his life until finally he tried to shoot me with his ki blast, and I said, interesting. And then I destroyed his ki blast with my destruction ki tendrils, and I said, you haven't mastered your ki energy yet, but I did. And I said, you just need a better teacher. And Boros said, incredible. I surrender, we will serve you, Master Lionheart. And I said, good, no more crimes, I want you to stay here and help innocent people everywhere and protect them from monsters. And he said, yes my lord, I will do as you command, master. And I said, good, I want you all to be heroes here on earth and serve the greater good, do not fail me and don't fail yourselves. And I said, order your forces back to the ship and dock your ship somewhere else outside of town where it's less dangerous for everyone else. And he said, yes sire. And then my father walked up to me and said, way to go son, you did a great job back there. I probably would have just punched him with a serious punch and killed it. I said, not everyone has to die father, we can definitely save certain bad guys if they want to change, we should give them a chance. And before I went back home I said, I don't want no more trouble out of you. Boros understood and he said, okay Master Lionheart, I will do whatever you say. And I said, we might need your help against monsters here on earth in the future, but until then don't misbehave, I will be back later to check up on you and your crew. And then me and dad went home and then I teleported back home and Boros said, teleportation, how many abilities does he have? And I said in his mind, oh I can do anything Boros, I even know how to use mind control to make people do whatever I want them to do. And I want you to remember that next time before you decide to do something evil. I hope we understand each other Boros, see you soon. And then Boros said, what have I gotten myself into? And then later that night Tatsumaki made love to me ravenously and she rode my member in the cowgirl position until finally came after 5 hours, and then I switched to my favorite doggy style position for about 2 hours, and then I switched to the spooning sex position and then the back massage sex position, and then I picked her up and I held her in my arms while I continued to move her body up and down on my 9-inch member slowly until I came inside her vagina again, and she quickly started sucking my member ravenously again, and then I came again instantly and I loved it.